2016 French taxi driver strike, also known as Operation Escargot, Operation Snail, was a protest movement led by French taxi drivers against the ride-sharing service Uber and other similar platforms. The strike was motivated by concerns over unfair competition, a perceived lack of regulation, and the impact of these services on the traditional taxi industry. The strike began on June 10, 2016, and lasted for several days, causing significant disruption to transportation services, particularly in major cities such as Paris, Marseille, and Lyon. 2016 Nuit debout protests, which translates to Up All Night or Standing Up All Night, were a series of grassroots demonstrations and occupations that took place in France in 2016. The movement emerged as a response to proposed labor reforms and broader socio-economic issues. The protests were initially sparked by the French government's proposed labor law reforms known as the Loi Travail or the El Khomri law, named after the then French Minister of Labor, Myriam El Khomri. On March 31, 2016, a group of activists and citizens gathered at Place de la République in Paris to protest against the proposed labor reforms. The demonstration adopted a unique format, with participants organizing nightly general assemblies and occupying public spaces, including squares and streets, to hold discussions, debates, and workshops. The movement drew inspiration from the Occupy Wall Street movement and Spain's Indignados movement. The Nuit debout protests quickly gained momentum and spread to other cities across France, including Lyon, Marseille, Toulouse, and Bordeaux. The movement sought to challenge existing power structures and engage in a collective reimagining of society. It emphasized direct democracy, horizontal decision-making, and inclusivity. The protests were marked by their peaceful nature, but clashes with law enforcement did occur, particularly during some of the larger demonstrations. There were instances of vandalism, property damage, and arrests, although these were not characteristic of the overall movement. Despite its initial momentum, the Nuit debout movement gradually lost steam as the government moved forward with the labor reforms. The protests officially ended in July 2016. Although the movement did not achieve its specific demands, it served as a catalyst for broader discussions about economic inequality, political engagement, and the future of work in France. The May Day protests in Paris in 2017 were marked by clashes between demonstrators and law enforcement authorities. May Day, also known as International Workers' Day, is traditionally a day of workers' rights demonstrations and protests. On May 1, 2017, various groups took to the streets of Paris to advocate for workers' rights, social justice, and other causes. However, the protests quickly turned violent as a small group of individuals, identified as Black Bloc anarchists, engaged in acts of vandalism, arson, and clashes with the police. The Black Bloc protesters, dressed in black and wearing masks or hoods to conceal their identities, targeted symbols of capitalism and authority. They vandalized storefronts, set fire to vehicles, and threw projectiles at the police. Law enforcement responded with tear gas, water cannons, and arrests to disperse the violent demonstrators and restore order. The Yellow Vests protests or Yellow Jackets protests or Yellow Vests Revolution, French, Mouvement de Gilets jaunes, are a series of populist, grassroots weekly protests in France that began on November 17, 2018. After an online petition posted in May 2018 had attracted nearly 1 million signatures, mass demonstrations began on November 17. The movement was initially motivated by rising crude oil and fuel prices, a high cost of living, and economic inequality. On November 29, 2018, a list of 42 demands was made public and went viral on social media, becoming a de facto structuring basis for the movement. After President Emmanuel Macron made an address on TV on December 10 announcing the cancellation of the fuel tax increase. Participation in the weekly protests diminished due to violence, particularly due to the loss of eyes, hands, and other neurological disorders caused by police blast balls. The protests eventually stopped due to the COVID-19 pandemic in France but continued again after health restrictions were lifted. The movement spans the political spectrum. Rising fuel prices initially sparked the demonstrations. Yellow high-visibility vests, which French law requires all drivers to have in their vehicles and to wear during emergency situations, were chosen as the unifying thread and call to arms because of their convenience, visibility, ubiquity, and association with working-class industries. The protests have involved demonstrations and the blocking of roads and fuel depots, sometimes developing into major riots, described as the most violent since those of May. The police action, resulting in multiple incidents of loss of limb, has been criticized by politicians and international media. It has sometimes resulted in police officers being charged for their violent behavior. The movement has received international attention. Protesters in many places around the world have used the yellow vest as a symbol. About 3 million people have participated in the yellow 2022 Paris shooting. French media say a 69-year-old opened fire on group of people, and clashes have erupted in Paris after 3 people were killed in a shooting at a Kurdish cultural center that the French government said appeared to have been racially motivated. French media reported that a 69-year-old man opened fire on a group of people at the Ahmed Kaya Center on Rue d'Enghien in the 10th arrondissement on Friday morning. Shots were also fired at a hairdresser's and a restaurant in the street. 3 people have been wounded. One critically, prosecutors said police detained the alleged gunman, who had previous convictions for assault and possession of an illegal weapon, and seized a weapon within minutes of the shooting. He was wounded in the face and taken to hospital. Laure Becue, the Paris prosecutor, said in a statement that 1 woman and 2 men had died in the attack, and 3 men had been wounded. There is no evidence at this stage to link the suspect to any extremist ideological movement, she said. Emmanuel Macron said in a tweet that the Kurds of France had been the target of a vile attack in the heart of Paris. The French president said his thoughts were with the victims, the wounded and their families, and thanked the police.
If you like my video, please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon for more updates. Thank you.